Thank you for inviting us. OVD-Info mostly it's a human rights media project that mostly defends freedom of assembly. But here we're going to talk about prosecution of anti-war activists. It's a small topic, a pretty specific one, but I think that the approaches that we used could be used in different contexts for human rights documentation, which is pretty important. Okay, sorry. So what we are talking about here is discrediting the use of armed forces of Russia. What does it mean? Some 10 days after the war began, the parliament decided that apparently it wasn't going as fast and smoothly as possible. There were protests all over Russia, and they decided that they needed to ban any support for anti-war protests, any anti-war expressions, any support for peace. So just in one day, they introduced administrative articles and criminal articles that ban discrediting the use of armed forces. Whatever it means doesn't really matter. It specifically bans calls to prevent the use of the army, which is basically calls to peace, and calls for anti-war assemblies. What is crucial here is that the first offense is a misdemeanor, so you get a fine, a pretty large one, but nonetheless. But on the second one, it's a criminal offense, you can get prison. Why do we need to monitor this at all? So first of all, we're a human rights project, and we provide legal help to people who face prosecution for support for peace, for example. We're often at the forefront of the legal practice, such as this, and we need to be able to gather quickly the judicial interpretation of the new laws to be able to understand what it even means and how to provide best assistance. And then we also do strategic cases. We want to change the practice overall. And we also, this is why we need the large scope of analysis to be able to show how this works in all the cases. And then we're a media project. We believe that information protects, and we need to publicize these cases just not to make them acceptable. And finally, I believe that context is important. So the protests are not as widespread now as they have been before. There were mass protests then, but now it's mostly expression that people use, for example, in solo demonstrations, when just one person comes out with a sign or posts a comment online or shows a Ukrainian flag at their balcony in support. And we think that showing how the government prosecutes those that support peace is really important to understand how the Russian society reacts overall. So we have a bunch of sources. Mostly it's judicial sources, but we also have the police websites that we monitor and our own data. We use Airtable, which is a service like a database. I'm gonna show you how it works in a bit. And there's a bunch of scripts that help us automate routine tasks. So first of all, the judicial sources. In Russia, the data is pretty good on the topic, and you have two sources. One is the judicial department's database. You can search a lot of cases there, but also every court has their own website. So which one would you choose? We decided that we need to choose both because the single database is really buggy. It's very slow. It's very hard to get cases from, and it lacks a lot of data. At the same time, courts' websites are almost always up to date, but sometimes they just don't work, and there are really many of them. So if we take both, we get pretty much all we can get. Then we have the issue that the data duplicates itself, but it's pretty easy to figure out unique court case numbers in every court, and it's not a problem at all. A few others is some regions have courts press offices. They have Telegram channels, and sometimes they publish data on how many cases under a certain article they heard. We did use it in the beginning, but now we don't. It's really hard to get the data. It's not in a single place, and you need to gather it all over different channels. But for example, St. Petersburg, one of the largest Russian regions, their courts websites just didn't work in the beginning of the invasion for about 2 weeks, and we didn't know what's happening there. And when they started working, the data was so bad that it wasn't usable at all. But then the courts published that now they have 24 cases pending, everyone is guilty, large punishments for going out, and now we know that the trend is not just Moscow, for example, that has up-to-date information, but different regions as well. Now we don't use it, but I think it's useful to keep in mind. And then the police websites. The police website has regional departments. It all has the same template, so it's really easy to navigate and parse through different websites. As soon as you figure out one, you get them all. And we saw that the police are really advertising how they prosecute people for speaking out against the war. It's like a media blitz. I think they wanted to show that this is so illegal, threaten people with criminal punishment every time they want. So we also get a useful source of data there. Finally, we have our own hotline. We have a Telegram bot through which we contact people. They call our legal hotline. But I'm not going to talk about this any longer because this is, I don't think that we can share this data, attorney-client privilege, it's pretty confidential. It's just to show that sometimes we have data on prosecutions before it becomes public, and it's also important to be able to integrate it into databases. But for example, human rights organizations or those documenting violations, I think it's very useful to have those different aspects. Okay, so just a couple of words about Airtable. I'm just going to show you how it looks. So basically, it's like a spreadsheet service, but in fact, it's a relational database. It has a couple of really useful features. For one, it has an API, so you can automate some tasks pretty easy if you can code even basic Python, for example. It has really smart filtering, sorting, counting, different data types like single select or multi-select, which is very useful for tagging something, for example. And it's a relational database, so you can attach things. Sorry. So here, for example, this is how it looks. We collected all the judicial data, all the cases. Here it's in a table, and here in the event description, you can see that there were some, sorry, I couldn't translate that, but there's a judicial text, and then we write up a short summary to be able to quickly tell what the person is being prosecuted for. For example, for saying peace, fine of about 2,000 lari, or for a comment, or for memes, or for doing nothing. Then we attach a region to it. Like you can see here, Crimea, no opinion. It's just because courts websites have a region. Anyway, we do the same with news articles from the police, and we have a table with regions. Airtable allows you, for example, to count the number of records that are tied to a region. So we get the first instance judgments, not to count appeal twice, and just get a number for each region of how many different court cases we can get. And then for each region, we count the number of records from each different source. We take the maximum amount, it's our estimate. So we're certain that this number is good because we do not add different sources together, so we don't duplicate data. At the same time, each source is not perfect. So courts' websites sometimes don't work. The police don't really publish all their cases, really few ones. So we take the maximum amount we can verify, but we are so certain in this number that, for example, we send the data to the European Court of Human Rights. If they ask us to give references for all the data, just a couple of buttons, and we get the list of all the links that we used. It's very convenient. What we do then, we just sum each region and get the number. It's actually bigger now since the day before yesterday when I started doing this. It's 200 more now. But the number is a media product in itself. The media love numbers, people love numbers. This number, for example, tells the story in itself because it's been 2 months only that support for peace is banned. But you can see that the police are really prosecuting people for it. And when it's dynamic, you can see the trend of how fast they're doing it. But it's not all you can do. For example, we calculate punishments from judgment texts based on regular expressions. It's not hard, but we can get an average fine. And then, for example, we can analyze in which regions, which courts are the most cruel ones. Or if you want, for example, you can see if older people who don't have a source of income or people with children get a smaller fine. It's not always like that, but it's a piece of data that you can put into context. Then you can classify, analyze the content of the expression, for example, to see for yourself or to show someone else which actions could be punished. You can make memes. So in Russia, it's a pretty popular format when you get the most stupid judgments and make a selection of them. So here under this article, Stop Fascism, for example, is discrediting the use of Russian army. It's somehow hurtful for them. Or freedom. This contradicts the goals of the Russian special operation in Ukraine. Showing these kinds of pearls, you can show how this is not really a legal case in any sense, how judgments are arbitrary. Well, and then we sent an application in the European Court of Human Rights. This analysis allows us to show how the law is so arbitrary that you can be prosecuted for anything at all, at random. It means you cannot even know which actions are banned and which are not. And this is not acceptable for a society based on the rule of law. We're going to see how the European Court of Human Rights sees it. And this data, you can also just roll up. Airtable makes it pretty easy. And if you can filter some data or make some conditions to describe which subset you want to show, it's always going to be current. So you can give someone a link and they can go there anytime and see how many at this second known punishments are imposed. There's much more to be done. So first of all, from the technical side, it takes us quite a long time to analyze the decisions. For example, maybe machine learning could help. I'm not sure though, we don't have that much expertise, but maybe text analysis algorithms could help us because courts, when they have to hand out so many punishments, they just use copy paste and the judgments are pretty much the same. So you could automate it and maybe have some insights from this as well. But there's so much data now. For example, we have more than 750 judgments right now, and you can explore so many topics. Just one that I've been thinking about is there's a new trend of denunciations in Russia. It's when people report each other to the police. For example, in their home even. I've seen cases where someone said something in their kitchen to a family member, and the family member reports them to the police for saying something bad about the Russian army or about the war. Another thing, okay, another case I also like, just gonna give you in a second. So I think it's pretty obvious why you should do it. First of all, automation saves a lot of time. It really did take me about 3 or 4 hours every day just to gather data, clean it, make it up to date. It's harrowing, it's just routine and cruel. But now, every time a media outlet asks us for a current number, which is pretty much every day, I can just give them the link and they always know that the data is solid and it's up to date. I don't need to do anything else. When it's all in one place, different aspects of the data, for example, the news by the police and the judgments, they complement each other. So when you're reading the news articles from the police about how they prosecute anti-war activists, you can see that they started boasting that the Federal Security Service helps them catch protesters. and the FSB. And then you can go to court judgments immediately and start searching for the FSB to see maybe it's a regional thing, maybe they're monitoring some social networks. And this is what we see. So these pieces of data complement each other. Some practices are not very legal, so you cannot see them in the judgments at all. The police are now going to schools, telling children, pupils and students in universities that it's illegal to participate in protests, that they're not allowed to say anything bad about the war. You cannot see that in judgment texts from the courts, but the police reports their public outreach. So you can use this aspect, for example, to show how the government is trying to stifle dissent in the academia, in universities. And the data is reusable. It's actually it saves a lot of time. When we first had our strategic cases on solo demonstrations, it's when one person goes out. We filed a brief with the Constitutional Court and helped the person who applied to win the case. But we had to analyze about 1,000 judgments, and it took us weeks to do that. But then when we filed the ECHR complaint, we had to do it all over again because the data was no longer current. It was in different pieces. It wasn't very consistent. But right now, you can reuse it as much as you want. So we just downloaded it as it is from Airtable and attached it to the European Court of Human Rights complaint. We didn't have to do anything. And now, well, we can just download it the same way and send it to the Human Rights Committee. Or we can give it to a media outlet for them to find some interesting cases, or to datathon participants to maybe explore and find something as well. It really saves a lot of time and allows us to explore more and use the data to act rather than just to gather it. A couple of points on the tech side of it. I didn't want to pay too much attention because it's pretty specific. So how it works is that you need to know at least any programming language. I think Python is pretty good because it has libraries as well as Ruby that allows integration with Airtable API. So it's really easy to write a script that is going to automatically link a region or delete duplicates or update some data or give you something else, pretty much anything you can think of. And the Airtable itself, it's very user-friendly, but it's a bit tricky to get into. So if you want to have complicated filtering and counting and build up relationships between pieces of data, it might take some getting used to. But they have really good support documentation. I think OVD-Info recorded public lectures on how to help NGOs organize their data. There's a lot of examples on GitHub. So I think it's manageable if you want to do that. So the police news parser, I'm more of an enthusiast than a coder, really. It took me about a couple of hours to get the parser done. I posted a snippet. It's not enough to set up the whole system up and running, but it has the most important bits. You just need to rewrite it into Python, I guess. And you're almost as good as you're almost ready to get all the data.